Welcome back to the StarCityGames.com pregame show here for our Season 3 Invitational in Atlanta. Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan, Matthias Hunt, and Ryan Overturf getting ready to bring you guys 3 days of coverage. Someone's going to walk out of here with a whole bunch of money, an invite to our Players' Championship, an invite to the next Pro Tour as well. And in order for them to do that, they're going to have to do well not only in Standard, but in Modern. So we're going to talk about everyone's favorite format, where players get to die as soon as turn 3, and then we get to kind of joke around in the booth. Yep. It's obviously our favorite format to cover, and we're going to talk about it right now. Now, it's impossible to cover every Modern deck, because then we just wouldn't cover any of the tournament. And we know that you guys, as much as you like us, and much you want to hear us talk about Modern, you actually want to watch people play Magic this weekend. We do too. So we're going to cover a handful of them as best we can. And Patrick, I'm going to start with you because I'm going to start with Infect. That means I'm going to start with Glistener Elf and Blighted Agent and Become Immense and Gataxian Probe and the new edition because it really needed some help and Blossoming Defense. And you're going to tell me that you would not play this deck this weekend, right?
No, this is not, we're going to have another big tournament where we pretend like this isn't by far the best deck in the room. It's fine. My check clears regardless. I just want to know. I just want to know up front. I think this is by far the best deck. It is actually surprising to me that Wizards of the Coast has not deemed this deck to be actionable just yet.
Sure.
It kills on turn 3, sometimes on turn 2 through resistance. The spread of tricks it gets to play means you can't metagame against it with a single card. It's fast, it's consistent, it's durable, it's violating a lot of the parameters or a lot of the articulated parameters of the format. I think this is the best thing going on, and if I was trying to win this thing, I would be playing Infect.
Well, Patrick has felt that this has been the best thing going on for a while now. You've covered a lot of Modern over the past couple of months, Matthias. Do you agree?
So I watched a game of Jeskai versus Infect, a deck full of 1-mana removal spells. An Infect player attacks with a 1/1 Glistener Elf with 2 mana up. The Jeskai player has a Lightning Bolt, a Path to Exile, a Snapcaster Mage, and still dies that turn. This is ridiculous. That's like, that is, you just can't interact with it on the board anymore at this point. Blossoming Defense, Mutagenic Growth altogether. I mean, and it's why we've seen really Modern is just warped. There's so many Simian Spirit Guides now because people are determining that Chalice the Void and Blood Moon are the only, like, you can't interact with this deck. You have to just hose them out with some card. And yeah, that's happening because this deck's just great.
Now, Ryan, I know you love Delver of Secrets. I know you love interaction for 1 mana. You're a big Delver guy. Can you actually beat Infect, or are you saying, you know what, it's time to play Infect?
This is actually my favorite matchup to play with Delver. It's always a sweat every time. It really tests the skills of both players, but not every deck can be as great as Grixis Delver in interacting. A lot of decks just get demolished by Infect, and we see the metagame warp over and over ways to beat Infect, but it still has remained true that it was a great choice for every tournament. So, like, how much can the metagame change and Infect can still be great before something has to give?
That's a good question, but I don't think it's changing this weekend. I still think Infect is deck number 1 to play. Now, the metagame did change a little bit because of new additions, and the deck that I'm talking about here is Dredge, Matthias. Now, you and Ryan have covered a lot of our Modern tournaments over kind of the last quarter of the year, so you have seen this deck grow and evolve. Cathartic Reunion is a huge addition. Golgari Grave Troll, its unbanning did this, and Simian Spirit Guide too, speeding this deck up. So talk to me about Dredge and how you feel it's positioned for this weekend.
Yeah, well, Dredge is actually, as far as the degenerate combo decks, it's up there with Infect. It certainly, I think, is the second most unfair deck in the room. Where maybe the beneficiary this weekend is that if Infect is truly the best deck, and I believe it is, it's very hard to hate on Infect and Dredge at the same time. So Dredge is getting to do its game plan largely unimpeded. It just gets to dump all its cards in the graveyard, make a bunch of 3/3s, win the game. So I think Dredge is a pretty reasonable option this weekend as well.
Brian, Dredge is this thing where it kind of came out of nowhere. Now people know that it's a thing, but people are still kind of skipping on graveyard hate. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case this weekend, but what do you think about people playing this deck this weekend?
Dredge, you definitely have to be concerned, and we have seen Dredge sideboards, they do have the fear. They know that you're going to have ley lines, you're going to have cages. So we see sideboards, Nature's Claims, Ancient Wedges. What's interesting about the way that Dredge has kind of evolved, it became a deck that's about 2, maybe 3 spells. It's about Prized Amalgam, Bloodcast, and Confederate. So Surgical Extraction has actually gotten a lot better against the deck, and that's the kind of hate I'd be packing to beat this deck this weekend. There's really nothing that Dredge can do about you having that card.
Patrick, for you, I know you're not a big Dredge guy, but all that aside, it is a deck that people have to prepare for this weekend or potentially play this weekend. So how do you feel about Dredge in this particular metagame?
Well, the advice that I've given to a lot of my friends who want to get into Modern, they're playing for the first time, I say get a bunch of the 3.5 decks, build Affinity, Infect, Burn, Dredge, and then have the right one for each weekend depending on whether the metagame's at.
Okay.
I would not Dredge this weekend, one, because I don't think the Infect matchup is particularly good, and then two, I think the sideboard hate is a little bit too egregious. I like Dredge more in the format, in the metagames that are defined a lot by removal, which can be hard on the Infects and the Affinities of the world, but Dredge can kind of plow through. I don't get the sense that's where the metagame's at right now, so I wouldn't play this deck, but I think it'll probably be the second most popular deck in the room.
Fair enough. He talks about 3.5 decks. Perfect segue. And Ryan, I'm going to come to you. We're going to talk about Burn and Affinity, and you can throw Zoo in there too if you want to. That's Arcbound Ravager. It's Cranial Plating. It's Goblin Guy. It's Eidolon of the Great Revel as well. I mean, some people just want to watch the world burn and kill people fast. Do you want to do that this weekend?
I think that Burn is a pretty reasonable choice. It has gotten a lot weaker since the printing of Collective Brutality. Just for 2 mana, you get to do 3 things that Burn is very unhappy that you're doing, which is a pretty bad spot for Burn. Dredge is playing a lot of these. That was previously a pretty favorable matchup. Might even be negative with the addition of that card. I'd be a little bit wary of Burn for that reason, though it's a deck that can tangle with Infect. You can sideboard in your Path Exiles, maybe Gut Shots. So you can beat a lot of the decks in the room. You can't beat everybody, but that's kind of in Burn's spot anyway. So if you've ever liked Burn, I don't see a reason to stop liking Burn. Affinity is kind of the same thing. It's matchups, there's still Ancient Grudge, there's still Stony Silence. There's going to be less of them because of Infect and Dredge, and maybe that's a couple points in favor of Affinity for this weekend.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing. I'm glad you mentioned that. The fact that there will be less Affinity hate maybe this weekend, maybe less Burn hate this weekend, Matthias. Options? Are these good decks to play?
Absolutely not. I wouldn't play either. Burn, I don't even... So Burn is typically horrible in combo mirrors because it's just a slow combo deck, and there's just not enough Jund and fair decks for me to want to play Burn. Sure, you have a good Infect matchup, and that's actually a pretty rare thing, so it's not abysmal, but I don't want to play that. As for Affinity, I don't know where your good matchups are anymore. Infect and Dredge, I don't want to play the robots against either of those 2 decks, and there aren't enough good matchups left in the room to compensate for that.
Yeah, that's a good point that you make as well. Where are the good matchups for these decks, Patrick?
Well, I'm a little bit higher on Affinity, I think, than Matthias is. I think the Infect matchup is north of 50% with a little bit of work, and I think that you can make your Dredge matchup acceptable as well. Burn is a shoulder shrug for me. It's fine. I mean, you have a lot of, you're a 3.5 deck. Anyone who really wants to beat you is going to beat you. People who are not prepared for you, you're going to be consistently advantaged against. I probably wouldn't play it this weekend, but I think it's an acceptable choice. I'm a little bit more bullish on Affinity, though. I think that's a solid choice for this weekend. It's a deck I would consider.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a quick second here to talk about Thoughtseize decks, because Jund players go to Jund and Abzan players go to Abzan. Very short answers from each of you. Would you play Jund or Abzan this weekend, yes or no?
No.
Matthias?
I'm going to give you a sentence. No, I can't beat Burn, Infect, and Dredge all at the same time.
Ryan?
Never in my life.
We could have done a bunch of analysis about Jund and Abzan, but come on, who are we kidding? We all know what the decks do. Thoughtseize you, play a Dark Confidant, grind you down, make your life miserable. We're not going to waste our time on that. We're going to go to Blood Moon decks because those are more fun.
Won a GP.
We need a new host. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing up here. Ryan, I'm going to start with you. You've watched a lot of Blood Moon decks recently. Todd Stevens with his White-Red Prison. Scred Red won a Grand Prix. I don't know where I am. There's no way you're doing this.
Well, I was going to say that Scred Red, I think, is the actual most underrated deck in Modern. Previously it was Grixis Delver, now it's Scred Red. All this 1 mana removal Scred Lightning Bolt is great at keeping pace with Affinity. You can set up Blood Moon, turns off all their Inkmoth Nexuses, just keep killing their threats on the table. And you have main deck hate for Dredge. You get Relic of Progenitus, and Eternal Scourge is a card that Jund is pretty unlikely to beat as long as you can keep spreading away their Tarmogoyfs. I do like this deck quite a lot. I would not be surprised to see Scred have a good performance in this tournament.
Matthias, when I think of you, I think of Blood Moons and 22 snow-covered mountains and your total wheelhouse, right?
Oh yeah, I've always been a big fan of Blood Moon, either side of the table, just don't care. I think Blood Moon's great right now. Like I said before, you can't interact with Infect and Dredge much on the board anymore, so you should just cheese them out. I want 4 Simian Spirit Guides in my list this weekend.
Okay. Now you do like mountains, though not really this style. Would you do this weekend?
I would consider it. It's at least intellectually honest. As some of the other commentators have mentioned here, they're not trying to fight fair. They're trying to play lock pieces backed up by some removal and try to cheese out a variety of decks. And I think the format is in an extreme enough place where that's the route to take rather than try to play with Lightning Bolts and Path to Exiles and hope to manage the game that way.
right, totally reasonable. Now, of course, we do know there are other decks. We can't cover them all. Bant Eldrazi, Grixis Delver, all your Snapcaster Mage decks. We know that, but we are short for time because players are sitting down behind us to get ready for the players meeting. So we're going to do quick predictions, and we're going to do a wrap on this show. Ryan, I'm going to start with you. Tell me what you would play in Standard, Modern, and make a prediction for a player.
I would go down swinging with Torrential Gearhulk in Standard, and I would play Grixis Delver in Modern. And I think Tom Ross is the player to watch this weekend. He beats Todd Anderson in the top 8 of recent open. He really cares about that player of the year, and he has 2 wins under his belt already. He's always a very dangerous player in invitationals.
Matthias, for you, Standard deck, Modern deck, pick a player.
You'd have to be crazy to not be playing Black-Green Delirium right now. This deck is just that good. I'd be playing that. In Modern, you talked about having your toolbox to turn 3 decks, so I'm going to go into the toolbox this time. I like Blood Moon, I like Simian Spirit Guide. I'm going to play Goryo's Vengeance this weekend.
Okay.
It's fast enough to race with these non-interactive decks, and I don't think there's no thought seizes around, so yeah, why don't we do that? Player, I know I can count on him to 8-0 day 1 of the Envy, and maybe he can top 8 it. He's had a lot of successes. I'm going to go with the current world champion, Brian Braun-Duin.
All right, Patrick, Standard deck, Modern deck, pick a player.
In Modern, I would be playing with Blooded Agent and Friends, like I have been suggesting for the last however long, year plus.
And change, yep.
I think because there is so much fatigue around Green-Black Delirium, I have a sense that Aetherwork Marvel is going to be heavily represented in this tournament. I would go with Blue-White Flash. I think that a lot of people are going to be kind of messing around with decks that are not very good against Spellcaller, Reflector Mage, and Gideon Allies Zendikar. I think it's objectively a much weaker deck than Green-Black Delirium, and I don't like the matchup head-to-head, but I think the metagame might have shifted into a position where Blue-White Flash is a good choice. As far as player goes, give me Tom Ross. I kind of like fidgety, beat-down decks in both formats. Tom Ross is a master of those.
My picks really quickly here. Black-Green Delirium because I'm lame and I like mid-range mirrors. I like to grind them down. For Modern, I would play Green-White Tron. Because we didn't really get the opportunity to talk about it, and Tom's win, I mean, as good as Tom is, that's more of a deck where, like, I don't want to say skill isn't involved, but, like, it was just a perfect metagame choice. So it could be a good metagame choice here this week, and I'm curious to see if he's going to play that. And for the player I'm going to pick here, give me Jeff Hoagland to kind of figure something out this weekend. He's good at poking holes in metagames.
You are an optimistic man.
I
You're thinking
am.
Jeff Hoagland, you think that both of the formats are susceptible to someone angle shooting right now, which is kind of where Jeff goes.
I definitely think Standard is available for angle shooting because people have gotten lazy. Modern, he's probably the best Modern player on the tour, so he'll figure something out there.
You guys are going with Hoagland versus Tom Ross. I'm just pointing out here,
Well,
we're saying a player of the year. It's going to be a player of the year and an invitational win for the same guy.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm feeling frisky, so that's my selection. As now we put a wind down here on our pregame show. Players are just getting seated behind us. We're going to take a short break here from Atlanta.